Have you ever felt weighed down by invisible burdens, thoughts, worries, or expectations that seem to pull you in every direction except the one you truly want to go? Imagine this. You're in the middle of a bustling day, surrounded by deadlines, tasks, people. Suddenly, there's a brief pause, a moment of stillness, and a question arises. Is this the way I want to live? This small question, seemingly insignificant, is one that often sparks a transformative journey. This question has led many of us back to the wisdom of ancient teachings, especially those from the Buddha, who once profoundly said, "In the end, only three things matter: how much you loved, how gently you lived, and how gracefully you let go of things not meant for you." In this video, we're embarking on a journey to explore the teachings of Buddhism on mental freedom. We'll dive into what it means to truly let go of old patterns, fears, and attachments that limit our potential for happiness and peace. Together, let's explore these habits and learn how to release them, discovering how to reclaim our peace and clarity. To start, let's look at why our minds seem so tied to these habits that bring suffering. In Buddhism, it's believed that suffering doesn't come from what happens to us, but from how we react and cling to certain experiences, desires, and fears, whether it's attachment to material things, clinging to past regrets, or constantly seeking approval from others. Each of these habits binds our mind in a cycle of stress, dissatisfaction, and longing. New insight and analysis. In today's world, we're encouraged to acquire, compare, and constantly strive, but often, these pursuits leave us feeling hollow, as if there's something more we're meant to reach but can't quite grasp. This is where the concept of detachment becomes not just a Buddhist teaching, but a crucial skill for inner peace. Detachment, however, isn't about giving up on life. It's about experiencing life fully, without the need to cling to every outcome, object, or opinion. So, let's explore the first habit: attachment to material possessions. Think of the last time you felt a surge of happiness after buying something new. For a moment, it feels like that item completes you or makes life easier. But how long does that satisfaction last? As Buddhism teaches, material items are impermanent, meaning they can never be the source of lasting joy. When we attach our happiness to external objects, we set ourselves up for eventual disappointment. Imagine this through the story of a merchant in ancient times, a man who had amassed countless treasures. One night, a storm flooded his home, and many of his possessions were lost. Heartbroken, he turned to a monk for counsel, who asked him simply, "If you lost everything tomorrow, what would still bring you peace?" For the merchant, this question was life-changing. He realized his true treasures were not in the things he owned, but in his own mind, peace, kindness, wisdom, guidance for breaking the habit of attachment. So how do we break this attachment? Buddhism offers a few practices that help. First, practice gratitude for what you already have. Reflect on the simple things that often go unnoticed, like the air you breathe, the food you enjoy, or the people in your life. Second, consider simplifying your surroundings, letting go of possessions that no longer serve you, and focusing on experiences that enrich your spirit. This isn't just about minimalism. It's about making room for true joy. And, perhaps most importantly, embrace generosity. By giving to others, you reinforce that joy doesn't come from keeping things for ourselves. In the Buddhist tradition, generosity is seen as a powerful way to free the mind from attachment. Sharing with others, especially those in need, teaches us to appreciate abundance in our lives and breaks the grip of material craving. Illustrative story for perspective. Take the example of a young woman who, after years of accumulating beautiful clothes, trinkets, and electronics, found herself feeling more isolated than ever. After a major life event, she started practicing meditation, and slowly, she realized the clutter around her mirrored the clutter in her mind. Gradually, she started to give away items, each act freeing her a little more. By letting go of the excess, she discovered she had more time, more space, and most importantly, more peace. This small act of releasing possessions helped her realize that fulfillment wasn't in acquiring more. It was in appreciating and sharing what she had. She had uncovered one of the most profound aspects of Buddhist wisdom. Simplicity and gratitude are the true paths to contentment. Transition to next habit and continual engagement. Attachment isn't the only habit that keeps us in cycles of dissatisfaction. Another is clinging to past regrets. In Buddhist teachings, regret is viewed as a heavy anchor, one that holds us back from the peace available right now. We've all made mistakes or missed opportunities, but Buddhism teaches us to view these experiences not with harsh judgment, but with compassionate understanding. Transition to the next habit. After exploring attachment to material things, let's delve into a habit that many of us know all too well: clinging to past regrets. Dwelling on the past, whether it's past mistakes, missed chances, or moments we wish we could change, acts as a heavy anchor that weighs us down. Buddhism teaches that this attachment to the past keeps us from experiencing true peace in the present. Regret, in itself, is not inherently harmful. It's natural to feel remorse or sadness over something that didn't go as planned. However, when we obsessively replay these moments, we only deepen the grooves of sorrow and self-judgment in our minds. Deep insight on regret and self-compassion. In Buddhism, the concept of self-compassion is central to overcoming the habit of regret. The Buddha taught that holding on to the past is like holding a burning coal, hoping it will hurt someone else, but only burning ourselves. Regret can be constructive when it's used as a lesson, but when it lingers and turns into self-blame, it becomes an obstacle to our peace. By practicing self-compassion, we learn to accept that everyone, including ourselves, makes mistakes. In this way, each mistake becomes an opportunity to grow rather than a reason to berate ourselves. Illustrative story for regret. Consider the story of Ananda, one of the Buddha's close disciples. After the Buddha passed away, Ananda was filled with immense regret, thinking of all the times he could have asked more questions, learned more, or spent more time with his teacher. Consumed by this regret, he struggled to find peace. Another senior disciple, seeing his distress, reminded Ananda of a fundamental teaching. The Buddha's wisdom is still within you. If you let go of the desire to change the past and instead focus on living those teachings here and now. This insight allowed Ananda to release his regrets and transform them into a deeper dedication to his own journey. In our lives, too, we can shift our focus from regret to growth. The past becomes not a prison, but a stepping stone on our path. Practical tips for letting go of regrets. How can we break free from regret's grip? Here are some techniques inspired by Buddhist practices. First, practice forgiveness, especially self-forgiveness. Acknowledge that no one is perfect. Our missteps are part of the human experience. Second, engage in mindfulness practices that help you bring your focus back to the present. When memories of regret arise, observe them without judgment and let them pass. Finally, adopt a daily habit of gratitude. By recognizing and celebrating what is good in our lives now, we dilute the power of regret over our minds. Transition to habit of worrying about the future. Our journey continues with another habit that holds us back from peace: worrying about the future. In Buddhism, this fixation on what might happen, the endless what-ifs and maybes, are seen as distractions from living fully in the present. Worry, though seemingly productive, often stems from our attempt to control the uncontrollable, leading to a life filled with tension and fear. As the Buddha taught, do not dwell in the past. Do not dream of the future. Concentrate the mind on the present moment. But what does that truly mean in our busy, uncertain lives? Analysis on future worry and control. In modern society, we're conditioned to plan, prepare, and be ahead of the game. While this is beneficial to an extent, it can quickly spiral into a habit of constant anxiety. This is where Buddhism offers a unique perspective, rather than trying to control outcomes. We focus on cultivating inner stability and presence. When we fixate on the future, we lose touch with the very life we are living now. Buddhist philosophy teaches that freedom from worry comes not by trying to secure the future, but by nurturing calm and resilience in our minds. Illustrative story on worry and control. Let's take the story of a young prince who was always anxious about his kingdom's future. He would spend countless hours worrying about potential threats, alliances, and the prosperity of his land. One day, he met a wise sage who told him, "Imagine holding water in your hand. The tighter you grip, the faster it slips away. But if you hold it gently, it stays." This simple metaphor struck the prince, helping him realize that trying to control everything led to more loss than peace. By trusting in his efforts and releasing the need for control, he found a sense of freedom he had never known before. In our own lives, worrying is like trying to control water. It often leads to exhaustion rather than the peace we seek. When we shift our focus from controlling outcomes to controlling our response, we find a new level of strength and calm. Practical tips for reducing worry. So, how can we ease our worry about the future? Buddhism offers several practices to cultivate peace. First, try mindful breathing. When worry arises, focus on your breath to ground yourself in the present. Second, challenge your thoughts. Instead of letting anxious thoughts spiral, examine whether they're based on facts or just fears. Lastly, practice acceptance. Remind yourself that uncertainty is a natural part of life, and not every question needs an answer. By embracing uncertainty, we release ourselves from the prison of worry. Transition to the habit of seeking approval from others. The next habit we'll explore is the deeply ingrained tendency to seek approval from others. In our connected world, where social media, workplace evaluations, and societal expectations constantly judge our worth, it's easy to fall into the cycle of needing validation. Buddhism teaches that seeking validation externally is like leaning on a reed, unstable and ultimately unreliable. True peace, the Buddha taught, comes from within. This doesn't mean we ignore others. Rather, we learn to build our self-worth independently of others' opinions. Insight on approval seeking and inner strength. When we seek approval, we hand over our power to others, basing our happiness on factors we cannot control. This need for external validation traps us in a cycle of dependence, where our self-worth fluctuates with every compliment or criticism. In Buddhism, cultivating self-acceptance and recognizing our inherent worth are foundational. We learn to see that our value doesn't come from others' perceptions, but from our own understanding of who we truly are. Illustrative story on approval seeking. Consider a monk who lived in a village and was once falsely accused of a crime. Many villagers, without knowing the full story, turned against him. Instead of defending himself or seeking their approval, he continued his daily practices, unaffected. Later, when the truth emerged, the villagers apologized. When asked why he hadn't tried to clear his name, he simply replied, "My peace doesn't depend on their opinion. It comes from within." This story shows that, like the monk, we can cultivate an inner source of validation that isn't swayed by others. True confidence comes from knowing ourselves, not from others' perceptions. Practical steps to cultivate inner validation. If you struggle with seeking approval, here are some practical steps inspired by Buddhism. First, spend time alone, reflecting on your values and goals. By understanding yourself better, you strengthen your inner foundation. Second, practice mindfulness of self-worth. Notice when you're tempted to seek validation and gently redirect your focus to what you truly want and need. Finally, set small boundaries. Say no to requests that don't align with your values. This reinforces that you value your own needs and thoughts, independent of external opinions. Transition to holding grudges and harboring resentment. Another habit that Buddhists caution against is holding on to grudges. In Buddhism, resentment is often compared to holding on to hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone. In the end, you're the one who gets burned. When we hold on to anger or grudges, we perpetuate a cycle of suffering within ourselves. Letting go doesn't mean condoning harmful actions, but releasing ourselves from the harm they continue to cause within us. Deep dive into forgiveness and freedom from resentment. Forgiveness in Buddhism is an act of liberation, a way to free ourselves from being bound to painful memories or conflicts. By releasing anger, we allow space for compassion and healing. Holding on to resentment consumes mental and emotional energy that could be used for growth and peace. Buddhist teachings emphasize that true peace comes from letting go of these grudges and embracing compassion, not only for others but for ourselves, as we free our hearts from bitterness. Illustrative story on forgiveness. One day, two monks were walking along a path and encountered a woman who needed help crossing a river. One monk helped her, carrying her across. Later, his friend, visibly disturbed, asked, "Why did you carry her? It's against our rules." The first monk replied, "I set her down at the river's edge. Why are you still carrying her?" This story illustrates that forgiveness isn't about forgetting, but about releasing the burden. By letting go of resentment, we free ourselves from emotional weight and return to the present. Practical techniques for letting go of grudges. To practice forgiveness, try a loving kindness meditation. Visualize the person with whom you hold a grudge and wish them peace and happiness. This may feel challenging, but it helps release bitterness. Secondly, reflect on moments when you've received forgiveness, acknowledging that we all make mistakes. Finally, practice journaling your thoughts and feelings, allowing yourself to express and then release them. This process transforms resentment into a source of inner strength. Transition to habit of overthinking. Next, let's explore the habit of overthinking. Overthinking is like a tangled web that traps the mind in endless loops of analysis, self-doubt, and what-ifs. In Buddhism, overthinking is considered a distraction from clarity and peace. It's described as letting the monkey mind, a restless, unsettled mind, take control, bouncing from one worry to another. When we overthink, we not only drain our mental and emotional energy, but also miss the simple joys of the present moment. Deep insight on overthinking and letting go. Overthinking often stems from a desire for control. We believe that by analyzing every detail, we can prevent mistakes or misfortunes. However, this creates a false sense of security. Buddhism teaches that mental peace comes not from having answers to every question, but from cultivating trust in the natural flow of life. By practicing mindfulness, we learn to quiet the restless mind, allowing our natural wisdom and intuition to emerge. Illustrative story on overthinking. Consider the story of a man who needed to cross a river filled with sharp rocks. He spent hours calculating the exact placement of each step to avoid slipping. Exhausted by his overthinking, he stood paralyzed, unable to move. A monk passing by noticed his hesitation and advised, "Trust each step you take, and focus only on the next one." The man realized that by taking one step at a time with full awareness, he could cross the river safely. In the same way, overthinking keeps us from taking the first step. Instead of attempting to solve every problem in our minds, we find clarity by trusting the journey, moment by moment. Practical tips to reduce overthinking. To quiet the mind, try these Buddhist-inspired techniques. First, practice breath awareness. When you catch yourself overthinking, focus on your breathing. Notice each inhale and exhale, anchoring yourself to the present. Second, try labeling thoughts. When a thought arises, simply label it as worry, planning, or doubt, and let it go. Finally, use grounding exercises. Engage your senses by focusing on sounds, textures, or sights around you. This brings you back to the present and breaks the cycle of rumination. Transition to self-judgment and judgment of others. Now, let's look at the habit of judging ourselves and others. Judgment is like placing heavy chains on our hearts, binding us with feelings of inadequacy, resentment, and separation. Buddhism teaches that judgment comes from a limited perspective, where we separate ourselves from others instead of seeing our shared humanity. When we judge ourselves harshly, we reinforce a sense of unworthiness. When we judge others, we create a barrier of superiority or hostility. Insight on compassion and non-judgment. Buddhism encourages a mindset of compassionate observation rather than judgment. This means observing thoughts and actions without assigning labels of good or bad. By practicing non-judgment, we open ourselves to understanding rather than condemnation, cultivating empathy for ourselves and others. Self-compassion in particular is powerful. It helps us realize that, like everyone, we are human, learning and evolving. Illustrative story on judgment. Once, a novice monk struggled with feelings of inadequacy. He constantly compared himself to more experienced monks and judged himself harshly for his perceived shortcomings. His teacher, noticing his distress, handed him a cup with a crack and asked, "What do you see?" The novice replied, "A broken cup." The teacher smiled and said, "It's a cup that still holds water. Its worth is not diminished by the crack." This simple teaching showed the novice that his value wasn't in perfection, but in his unique qualities and his willingness to grow. In the same way, when we release judgment, we allow ourselves and others to be whole, even with imperfections. Compassion helps us accept that everyone has their own path and struggles. Practical steps for practicing non-judgment. To overcome judgment, start with self-kindness. When critical thoughts arise, remind yourself that growth is a process, not a destination. Next, practice empathetic listening when speaking with others. Seek to understand without jumping to conclusions or forming judgments. Finally, meditate on compassion, visualizing understanding and kindness for yourself and those you judge. Over time, this practice softens the edges of judgment, creating a more peaceful mind. Transition to habit of neglecting self-care. Another habit that hinders our peace is neglecting self-care. In our fast-paced lives, self-care often becomes an afterthought. However, Buddhism teaches that caring for our body and mind is essential for spiritual well-being. Neglecting self-care is like trying to pour from an empty cup. When we prioritize everyone else's needs while ignoring our own, we deplete our energy, patience, and inner peace. Insight on self-care as a foundation for peace. Buddhism emphasizes balance. Just as the Buddha taught the middle path, a life of moderation and balance. Self-care is about maintaining a harmonious state. It's not about indulgence, but about replenishing our energy to better serve ourselves and others. Self-care fosters resilience, allowing us to meet life's challenges with equanimity. Illustrative story on self-care. Consider a gardener who tirelessly watered the plants in his community garden but neglected his own. His flowers began to wilt, no matter how much he watered them. A friend suggested he first take time to nourish his own garden. Once he did, his plants thrived, and he could share them with the community. The gardener realized that caring for himself allowed him to offer more to others. This story reminds us that self-care isn't selfish. It's foundational. When we prioritize our well-being, we become stronger and more available to those around us. Practical steps for self-care. To build self-care into your life, start by setting boundaries. Protect your time and energy by saying no to things that drain you unnecessarily. Second, prioritize rest and relaxation each day, whether through a few minutes of meditation, reading, or a short walk in nature. Finally, nurture your body by eating well, staying hydrated, and paying attention to your physical needs. Self-care doesn't require grand gestures. Even small acts contribute to a healthy, balanced mind. Transition to habit of holding on to control. Another habit that creates inner tension is the need to hold on to control. In life, we often believe that by controlling circumstances, we can secure our happiness or avoid pain. But according to Buddhism, clinging to control is like trying to grasp smoke. It only leads to frustration. True peace comes not from controlling life, but from flowing with it. embracing its uncertainties. Insight on control and surrender. Control is often a mask for fear, the fear of failure, the unknown, or loss. Buddhism teaches that peace comes from letting go, from embracing life as it is rather than how we wish it to be. By surrendering control, we open ourselves to experiences without rigid expectations. This surrender doesn't mean inaction. It means finding calm in the midst of life's unpredictability. Illustrative story on letting go of control. Once, a man was caught in a sudden storm at sea. Terrified, he gripped the side of his boat, trying to steady it. A fisherman passing by called out, "Relax your grip, or the waves will flip you over." The man loosened his hold, and as he surrendered to the waves, he found a rhythm that kept him afloat. This story shows that letting go of control is not weakness, it's resilience. By releasing our tight grip, we allow life to move naturally, finding strength in flexibility. Practical tips for letting go of control. To practice letting go, begin with mindfulness meditation, focusing on the present moment rather than future outcomes. Next, try journaling to identify areas where you're overly controlling. Reflect on how releasing control in these areas could create space for growth. Lastly, cultivate an attitude of trust in life. Remember that every experience, even challenging ones, offers an opportunity for growth. Transition to habit of gossip and idle talk. Let's now explore the habit of engaging in gossip or idle talk. In Buddhism, idle talk is seen as a distraction from mindfulness and compassion. Gossip not only damages relationships, but also clouds our mind with negativity and judgment. The Buddha taught that mindful speech fosters connection and trust, while gossip creates division and distrust. Insight on mindful communication. Speech is powerful. Words can heal or harm, build or destroy. By practicing mindful speech, we create harmony with ourselves and others. This practice is known as right speech in Buddhism, one of the steps on the Noble Eightfold Path. Right speech encourages us to speak with purpose, kindness, and integrity. Illustrative story on gossip. One day, a young monk spread rumors about a fellow monk. When he realized his mistake, he went to his teacher, who asked him to pluck a feather pillow and scatter the feathers in the wind. Then, he asked the young monk to gather them back. "It's impossible," the monk exclaimed. His teacher replied, "Just as it is impossible to gather the feathers, so is it to take back words spoken carelessly." This story shows that gossip, once spread, cannot be undone. By speaking mindfully, we contribute to peace rather than discord. Practical steps for practicing mindful speech. To avoid gossip, pause before speaking and ask yourself if your words are true, kind, and necessary. Second, redirect conversations that veer toward gossip, guiding them toward positive or constructive topics. Lastly, practice listening with empathy by focusing on truly understanding others rather than judging or gossiping. We foster deeper connections and mutual respect. Transition to the habit of living in the past. Our next focus is on the habit of living in the past. Insight on acceptance and presence. In Buddhism, presence is key to experiencing life in its fullness. By clinging to past events, we deny ourselves the opportunity to engage with what's happening now. Letting go doesn't mean forgetting. It means accepting the past as a part of our journey without letting it dictate our current state of mind. The Buddha taught that true. Illustrative story on living in the past. A well-known Buddhist story tells of two monks who were once accused unfairly and punished severely. One monk held on to resentment for years, feeling that life had been unjust to him. The other accepted the past, saying, "I left that burden long ago," while the first monk struggled under the weight of his memories. The second monk thrived, free from the prison of his past. This story teaches that holding on to past events is like carrying a heavy load. It only serves to hinder our progress. Practical steps for embracing the present. To release the grip of the past. Try these practices. Start with mindful acceptance. Acknowledge past experiences without judgment, seeing them as steps on your path. Second, practice grounding exercises whenever you find yourself dwelling on past memories. Focus on your senses, notice the colors, sounds, and sensations around you to bring yourself back to the present. Finally, keep a gratitude journal. By celebrating small moments of joy in the present, you'll find less reason to return to what once was. Transition to habit of overconsumption of media. In today's digital age, the habit of overconsuming media is widespread. We are bombarded by endless streams of news, social media, and entertainment, which can overwhelm our minds and disrupt our inner peace. Buddhism teaches the importance of simplicity and discernment in what we allow into our consciousness. Excessive media consumption can fill our minds with distractions, taking us away from mindfulness and presence. Insight on mindful consumption. Buddhism promotes mindful consumption, which doesn't just apply to food, but to everything we consume with our senses. By being selective about what we engage with, we protect our mental well-being. Media is a powerful tool, but when consumed without intention, it can lead to comparison, anxiety, and distraction from our true selves. Limiting our media intake helps create space for clarity, reflection, and purposeful action. Illustrative story on overconsumption of media. A student once came to a Zen master, feeling anxious and overwhelmed by the news he consumed every day. The master placed a glass of water and a handful of dirt in front of him, stirring the dirt into the water. "The water represents your mind," he explained. "The more dirt you add, the cloudier it becomes." He then waited as the dirt settled to the bottom, leaving the water clear. Letting the mind settle, like clear water, allows us to see the world without distortion. This story shows that just as stillness clears water, mindful media consumption clears the mind, allowing us to experience life with greater peace and understanding. Practical tips for mindful media consumption. To reduce overconsumption, start by curating your content. Follow accounts and sources that uplift and inspire, and unfollow those that bring negativity. Set specific time limits for media use, choosing quality over quantity. Finally, incorporate digital detoxes. Take regular breaks from devices and reconnect with the real world through nature, hobbies, or quiet reflection. Transition to habit of resistance to change. The habit of resistance to change is one that many of us struggle with. Buddhism teaches that change is an inevitable part of life, known as the principle of impermanence. When we resist change, we are in conflict with the natural flow of life. This resistance stems from fear of the unknown, fear of losing control. However, by learning to embrace change, we open ourselves to growth and new possibilities. Insight on impermanence and flexibility. Impermanence is one of the 3 marks of existence in Buddhism, along with suffering and non-self. By understanding that nothing is permanent, we learn to appreciate each moment fully and adapt to life's changes. Resisting change only creates suffering. When we flow with change instead of resisting, we cultivate resilience and acceptance, qualities that help us navigate life's uncertainties. Illustrative story on change and acceptance. Once, a bamboo tree and an oak tree grew side by side. During a storm, the oak resisted the wind, trying to stand firm but eventually breaking. The bamboo, on the other hand, bent and swayed with the wind. And once the storm passed, it returned to its original position. This story reminds us that flexibility, like the bamboo, allows us to weather life's storms without breaking. By embracing change rather than resisting, we maintain our inner peace even in challenging times. Practical tips for embracing change. To cultivate acceptance, start by practicing mindfulness. When faced with change, acknowledge your emotions without resistance, allowing yourself to feel. Second, reframe challenges as opportunities for growth. Each new experience, even the uncomfortable ones, can teach us something valuable. Lastly, cultivate trust in life's flow. Embrace change as part of your path, knowing that every phase, even the difficult ones, contributes to your journey. Transition to habit of neglecting spiritual growth. Our final habit is neglecting spiritual growth. In our busy lives, we often prioritize material achievements over inner development. But Buddhism teaches that true happiness and fulfillment come from within. Neglecting spiritual growth is like neglecting to water the roots of a plant. Without nourishing our inner life, we can feel lost, disconnected, or unfulfilled. Insight on the importance of spiritual nourishment. Spiritual growth is about cultivating a sense of purpose, connection, and understanding of ourselves and the world. It doesn't require religious affiliation, but a commitment to inner exploration and growth. By prioritizing spiritual practices, we create a foundation for mental freedom, resilience, and genuine peace. Buddhism encourages practices like meditation, mindfulness, and acts of kindness, all of which deepen our connection to our true selves and to others. Illustrative story on spiritual nourishment. Imagine a young seeker who asked a wise monk for guidance on achieving peace. The monk handed him a lamp and asked him to light it. Then asked, "Where does the light come from?" The seeker replied, "From the lamp." "Of course." The monk shook his head. "The light comes from within the lamp, but only because it's fueled by oil. Likewise, your peace comes from within, but it requires nourishment, time, practice, and intention." This story reminds us that spiritual peace is cultivated, like a flame tended with care and attention. Practical steps for fostering spiritual growth. To nurture your spiritual growth, start with daily reflection. Set aside a few minutes each day for introspection, whether through meditation, journaling, or quiet contemplation. Explore different spiritual practices such as meditation, yoga, or mindfulness, finding what resonates with you. Finally, connect with nature as a means of reconnecting with the larger world, cultivating a sense of peace, wonder, and gratitude. Bringing it all together, we've journeyed through a rich tapestry of Buddhist wisdom, exploring 15 habits that hinder mental freedom. Each habit, whether it's attachment to material possessions, clinging to past regrets, or overconsumption of media, serves as a roadblock on the path to inner peace. But through awareness and intentional practice, we can overcome these habits and create space for joy, purpose, and fulfillment. Remember, true transformation begins from within. The Buddha taught that suffering is part of the human experience, but liberation from suffering comes from understanding and freeing ourselves from these habits. By embracing these teachings, you have the power to create a life of greater peace, clarity, and resilience. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If you found this video insightful, consider subscribing to our channel, Wisdom Diaries, for more content on mindfulness, personal growth, and spiritual nourishment. And as you go about your day, try to notice which habits arise within you and how you might practice letting them go. One small step at a time, let's continue to explore the depths of wisdom together, cultivating lives filled with meaning, purpose, and fulfillment.